Welcome to the Therapist Book Club, where two therapists dive into their favorite books and the powerful mental health themes they uncover.
Whether you're here for literary inspiration, therapeutic tools, or just some lighthearted conversation, you've found the right place.
So get cozy and let's dive into the pages together.
All right, welcome back for another episode. We are here talking about It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini. I don't know if I said that right, but this is an older book. You can kind of tell as you're reading reading the book, you can get little hints of the age of the book, but it's got some really interesting mental health. Well, the whole book is about mental health.
Yeah.
So maybe do you want to start us off by kind of telling me a little bit about what your overall thoughts were about the book? Maybe we could start there.
So I thought it was a really interesting book. I thought I did get hung up on some of the old themes of like, this is a 15-year-old. So, well, I'll just give I'll give a little background. This is the story about Craig, who's a 15-year-old teenager who could maybe be like OCD or autistic somewhere in there, with the, oh God, like just the um re repetitive things that he does, the drawing of the maps, the
Going to the bathroom.
yeah, the way he goes, yeah, way he utilizes the bathroom. Eventually pressure kind of mounts as he goes to this new high school that's for like high achievers, what is it called? Uh, Manhattan's Executive Pre-Professional High School. The pressure mounts for him, so and he can no longer eat and keep food down.
Yeah.
And he does it. This was a really interesting, like, has an interesting IFS tie into it. He has these voices or people or parts that he
Yeah.
talks to throughout the story. Um, and he eventually stops eating, stops sleeping, and one night there's he what almost ends his life.
Yeah. He
Um,
becomes suicidal.
yeah, which leads him into like, I don't know, inpatient.
He checks himself in to
Yeah.
the and then
So the thing about the inpatient was his roommate an adult
they were all adults.
except Craig, right? He's
Yes.
15.
Yeah, because the adolescent
Well,
was being refinished or
yeah,
they were
I was like, I couldn't get past that part that there were like adults in there with these two teenagers. I don't know. So
so
that like stressed me out because you would just never, first of all, you wouldn't even really have co-ed inpatient, let alone adults mixed with teens.
today was that
Okay.
back then?
But I mean, so he said that, so the author, in the end, it talks about the author, this actually spent time in a mental hospital. He keeps calling it psychiatric hospital in 2002 to 2003, like for a space of time, and wrote this book in 2005.
But he was an adult at the time, right? When he was
Yeah.
actually in there. Yeah.
I entered social work in 2005,
Mhm.
and it wasn't a thing at 2005 to mix co-ed even then, but maybe that was just the state I was in. Because I really did go back. I was like, wow, I started in 2005. I'm thinking about the teens that I worked with when they utilized hospital services. Um, in inpatient, they were typically separate, but maybe not everywhere, but that
Well,
maybe
the way I was kind of envisioning it was they were separate wards, but then they did some activities together because Craig, the character, doesn't really talk about other women in interacting. He just talks about this one teenage female that. So I was envisioning that they were separate, but they did joint activities together, maybe.
okay. That one just stressed me out because I was
You
like,
know what stressed me out was like the emergency room situation.
so much of it, I am like, listen, I am not necessarily a proponent for inpatient. Like I sometimes it's necessary, and he chose for himself. That's like my clients who choose for themselves, I 100% support them, but man, it can be really full of trauma if you do not get a choice
I
to
didn't feel like he really got it to give informed consent, though. He did not know what he was getting himself into by checking into this hospital.
I don't know if he knew it, but throughout the book, he does continually talk about how he checked himself in.
Yes.
And so I wonder if you and I know that distinction and did the character at the time, because like, yeah, he brings that up throughout the story a few times that he checked himself
He
in,
chose. Yeah.
which I think is always interesting because in intensive and inpatient, there's always a hierarchy that gets built. And I started to wonder, I'm like, is that the psychiatric hospital's hierarchy of like, I chose to be here?
Whereas like the schizophrenic guy, they admitted him or they
Yes. Yeah, Noelle probably did not choose to be in there based on her version of what she shares. She doesn't seem overly like traumatized to be in there. Like it's interesting because I do think a lot of my clients that utilize a psychiatric hospital, there's some talk about not needing to like people who, and I think there were some characters, but I cannot say what was his roommate was like Masudu.
Oh, he was like an Egyptian guy.
Yeah,
His name.
like he doesn't talk about being there against his will. Like he kind of sounds like he can't function outside of the hospital, like
Muqtada.
Utada, there we go. And then so anyway, I'm like there was just some interesting I thought it was just some interesting things but this man wrote it based on his experience. And so to me, I'm like, I wonder how much of this he specifically experienced in the hospital and how much of this he needed to put in to like keep the story going.
Yeah, I loved all the characters. I thought they were all very quirky and interesting, and Craig found some really beautiful friendship while in the hospital and was able to find like what he wants in friendships, and this like resulted in him choosing not to be friends later on with one of his best friends, but I think is how it kind of ended up. But like he was able to see what matters to him and what doesn't matter to him and let that stuff kind of fall away.
I think he went back and he chose not to be friends with any of his
Yeah.
friends, really. Like he felt like none of them really saw him for who he was and led him to like health the way that he experienced it in the hospital. I thought it was a cool story, like to see that the hospital can work and it can like serve its purpose. Like I thought that was kind of nice that they versus we see people um in media often cycling through the hospital or whatever. And for some people, they go, they get the support they need. Maybe it's medication, maybe it's some therapy, it's intensive, and then they can do the rest of the work outside of the hospital. There are people who experience that, but we just don't see that in the movies.
Well, so I also think that Craig would not have been admitted or would not have been put into inpatient today with what how he presented in the hospital.
I, yeah, Craig is an interesting, when I worked at community mental health, we had people who were severely mentally ill, SMI. Sometimes it's called SMI. Here in Utah, we call it SPMI, severely pervasively mentally ill. And I think I get concerned about their safety, but because they're not suicidal, they don't get the hospital services that maybe they could benefit.
Yeah.
Like maybe having some services that are helping with their medication to stay on the medication, maybe they could stabilize. And so I think you're true. I think they would look at Craig as a mental health case,
Yes.
like quote unquote mental health case versus a suicide risk.
Maybe, well, maybe. the way he presented in the hospital was, I want to kill myself. But the part that was missing for me in the ER when he was being assessed was there was not really an assessment. Like all they did was take his word to say, I'm suicidal. And they said, okay, let's put you in the hospital. That's not really how the system works today. I don't
Yeah,
know
no,
if that's how
it's
it
not
works.
with insurance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know who I loved? There was a scene in there of the art therapist,
Mhm.
and I was like, actually, that was really good therapy. Like the way she managed that in this scene, they've come together to do their art therapy. It's really like one of the only therapies we kind of see in the book,
Yeah.
which is not true to hospital, right? Like there would have been more services like that or individual sessions, and I'm assuming it just that just wasn't included
Yeah.
is part of his story. But the art therapist I loved so much, and the way she really was like, so okay, Craig walks in and got some like a block. He can't come up with what to
I
draw.
can't do art. I'm not an artist. I don't know how to draw.
Yeah, his brain is kind of blank. And I loved the way she engaged the group. And she said, "Hey, group, do you guys have any ideas?" And she turned to Craig. And instead of saying, "Kay, did you like that idea?" She was like, "Did you get any ideas from the group?" Or like she came from a really strong community background in that way and reduced some of the like power struggle of, okay, well, no Noelle just gave you that idea. Did you like that idea? And I loved how I don't think he's a therapist.
Like they were just volunteers.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the author of the book, I don't
Oh,
think he's a therapist, but the way that was written, I was like, oh, I kind of learned a little bit from it of like, that was a great way to ask that question, right? It reduced the power struggle. And it was like, hey, has anything triggered some ideas for you? Did you like any of those ideas or have you had some? He said, by that time, I was already drawing. This is where I wondered about OCD. Then he started his drawing, his compulsive drawing of the maps of New York that were there from what did he say? He was 7 when it started.
I don't remember.
He was young enough to not understand
Uh,
how to trace things from the book. Remember that? And the mom's like, well, you need a light under it. And so he's probably, I think he said somewhere, it was either 5 or 7, if I remember in there. But yeah, I was like, it's so interesting. The way his brain works was so interesting. Like the the rituals that he had and the compulsions that he had. And when he left the hospital, I was like, oh, okay, he's finding lots of peace in these rituals and compulsions. But what happens when that gets thrown off? Is he going to be okay?
yeah, that was something that was lacking for me too. Is like, what's the aftercare after he leaves the hospital? What's his? I mean, he had the psychiatrist or somebody that he was seeing before he went into the hospital that I imagine he would continue seeing, but I left the story feeling like he was full of hope for his future and he was ready to do life differently, which was hopeful and beautiful. And yet, like the realistic part of me was like, he still needs support. Like, I'm so glad he's found this hope and this new outlook on life, but like that sometimes is not enough. And
Yeah.
I was nervous for him.
You remember he talks about he would see the psychiatrist who would ask him questions. And I thought that this was like the realest, most present day thing. Remember, he was saying his mom would write a check and he would take the check, but he didn't want to go too often because of how expensive he knew it was. And I was just thinking about sometimes I have clients who become aware of the cost of therapy and they start to do similar things. Like they feel like they can't, even though they it's hard for them to advocate for themselves and say, hey, it would be helpful for me if I came more often. And yeah, I thought that was so interesting. I was like, well, insurance hasn't changed.
Yeah.
But to be fair, back then, I'm not sure that mental health services were covered the same way as they're covered now. Now the problem is if people have high deductibles, they have insurance coverage, quote unquote, again, but they're paying, a hundred and something dollars out of their pocket until they meet that deductible. And
Thousands of dollars.
mhm. Yeah, and I was like, isn't that so right out the gate he kind of had that this story is written from Craig's point of view. It's narrative. It's like a narrative point of view, and he's just kind of narrating his thoughts. You're living in his brain as he goes throughout the story. And so he has those thoughts, of he feels bad that he's causing these problems to his parents and mom has to write that check. And I thought I was like, wow, that is still a dynamic that is happening. If this was written in 2005, this is 20 years later.
I mean, the whole dynamic between him and his mom, mostly, I think his dad was kind of absent in the story, but I thought was an interesting dynamic. And like, I think sometimes a lot of parents have this, if we go on this theme of like maybe he had some OCD tendencies, some parents, I don't know if you've seen this, but some parents are like, is there something I did that made this happen? Or like, did I do something wrong to make them have this way of functioning? But I think like, I did think no, in most cases is like their brain is just this way, or they have learned to cope in this way because it's worked for them. And I like to try to help the parents find new ways to help support their kid when we uncover certain tendencies or certain symptoms. I don't know. Have you seen that in parents like self-blaming
Yeah,
when
and maybe it's helplessness too, right? But like when you have a kid that's 15, like the parents aren't really going to do as much as the teen and the therapist are, right? So yeah, so you could be fearful, like, oh my gosh, my child is suicidal, and what can I do?
Oh, we
Froze
paused.
there.
Here we are. We're back. Okay. Says my internet is unstable.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Try again. What were you saying?
So I think for parents, sometimes it's helplessness too, right? Like there's not a lot that they can do if their 15-year-old like comes into therapy sessions. I might involve a parent, but really the work is going to be done in the session with the 15-year-old. So if I was the parent outside of session, I'm like, so what should I be doing? How should I help this? Like, um, I went to a training just yesterday and they talked about parent, like caregiver and child dyads. And she was talking about how important it is to train or look at a parent as a co-pilot. And I don't know that that's how I've been trained in therapy, especially with teens. I
Yeah.
think I think as a parent, I know how important it is to involve a parent, but I don't know many modalities other than like DBT that has a solid parent component. Because yeah, I think that could be really scary. Like you're putting your child's life in the therapist's hands and hopeful that they will find a way out of it, right? And I noticed my parents will vacillate between like being over involved and then trying to like step back and give space. And they just
Mm.
don't know. Like nobody knows how to respond to this.
And I feel like Craig's mom took a very hands-off approach.
Mm.
Like, at least that's the way she was portrayed by Craig, is like she was there, but not really involved in helping him get better. Like even in the hospital, like she came, like he checked himself in the middle of the night, so she didn't know he had done that. And then when she finally showed up, it was a very quick, like, okay, we gotta, she brought her dog into the hospital, so they had to get her out of the hospital quickly. So it was very quick. And then, like, there was no discussion of her involvement in the actual inpatient time, which in most cases, I would guess that adolescents would have parents coming in maybe to support in
Mhm.
doing some family
Yeah,
type therapy.
we have family sessions. Yeah.
But she was very much like, okay, go, bye, have a good time. I'll see you when you come out. It was strange to me, but maybe in that context, maybe that makes sense of like the parents are sometimes trying to step back and let the kid figure it out as they are growing older.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a kid who this is happening because they say all the pressure that they're under, I think it's like walking on eggshells, right? Like you don't want to be like too much because what if you trigger it for them and now you feel bad, you feel that guilt, you know? I think it is this like tippy toe dance for parents of um like I see this all the time. One example is like when kids go hybrid or homes like virtual school. And like there's a secondary gain of not dealing with the thing that caused virtual school or hybrid school, you know? And sometimes parents play a role in that. Like if I never leave the house and I just do virtual school and it's piece of cake, I don't have expectations for me and I don't leave the house and I don't have friendships, so I'm safe from being
Lots of
hurt.
avoidance. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's yeah, that's not a way to live life. And then as parents, we're like, "Oh, you're right." Like we're so fearful of the suicidality, right? We're like, "Okay, yes, you're right." But the reality is as parents, we also have to find that tippy toe dance of like, but it's our job to teach and nurture and grow and help them, support them on that journey because they might become an adult who does not know how to meet expectations. And now we don't have the same role in their lives.
I mean, they'll become adults who are so afraid to go outside their comfort zone. I mean,
Mhm.
it will just perpetuate the problem if we, when they're under our care, don't help them stretch that muscle and grow that muscle.
There's a really good polyvagal theory that they'll call it stretch and rest
Mm.
versus like trigger and shut down. But so yeah, we want to give kids the opportunity to stretch and we rest with the nervous system so the nervous system doesn't shut down and now we're stuck waiting, which I think is what happened to Craig. I think he had a lot of stretching and he had no resting. And so eventually it went too far and he kind of shut down. I think the hospital helped him kind of get moving again, reset himself. And I think that's where we got the hopefulness at the end. But the journey for him is going to be how do I, like I want to continue to grow as a person. How do I stretch? But I need to remember to rest in between, to calm my mind, to quiet my whatever it is that is rest for him.
Yeah, because if he never if the hospital was the space for him to rest, but then he goes back into real life and he hasn't learned how to do that really, except for removing himself from this stressful situation by being hospitalized,
Yeah,
gonna continue to bounce back and forth into the hospital setting in order to get the rest, maybe subconsciously.
totally. And this is why I hate the term graduation in therapy.
Like it's done forever. You're
Done
done.
forever.
I'm
Done.
healed.
And I'm like, I think it's a lifelong because they didn't graduate him, but it did feel like a graduation. And then,
They did use that word, didn't they?
oh, I can't, did they? I don't know. I don't remember for sure. If they didn't, though, you got the feeling too that it's a graduation. So he left the hospital feeling like, oh, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna volunteer and I'm gonna visit, which I think puts him in this level of all better.
Mhm.
I'm all better, so I'll come back and visit and volunteer because I'm all better. And I don't know, I don't ever like I've had traumas in my life and I don't feel burdened
Yeah.
anymore after doing my own personal therapy, but I don't know that I'm ever all better in life. And I don't feel that as gloom and doom. Like I think there's new information that comes up that I'm like, wow, I never thought of that in relationship to trauma. And the foundation is laid. So reprocessing that new information goes super quick because I laid a great I'm not starting over. And every time I do that work, I grow and progress as a person. But if I had the mindset of all better, which I've had this before with EMDR, we're all better done and we end sessions and new information comes up and now they feel like failures coming back and saying, I'm having that problem again.
I always, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the EMDR component because I always tell my clients that it appears to be resolved for now,
Hmm.
which is great. It's not going to feel so heavy right now. And life has a funny way of coming right back around to find other ways in which you can heal. So don't be surprised if a year from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, this comes back around and you're like, ooh, that's painful in a new way that I hadn't considered, or maybe in an old way that is just heavy again. And
Hmm.
that's how life goes. And so we can celebrate the resolution now and then have an awareness that it's probably going to come back around in some way or another.
Yeah. And sometimes life changes.
Yeah.
Like our kids grow, our parents die, like I'm sure I haven't processed the trauma in those.
In that context. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a fail. How could we possibly have processed that? But you laid a fantastic foundation to come back, clean that up, and continue to progress. And now you've learned and grown and nurtured yourself in a new way.
I've had so many clients tell me that they've done EMDR years ago and coming back to do it now feels so much easier.
Hmm.
Not easy because it's easy to process trauma, but because, like you said, I like that language, the foundation is built. Your brain already has the skill to do this work because it's done it before and it can jump right back into that track to do it seamless.
Perfect. So what do you rate the book?
I pretty high. I liked it. I think I thought it was really quirky and interesting and funny. There were several points where I laughed out loud, which I
Mm.
give that a high marking when I run across that. I give it a 4.5.
I so I give it a 3.5 because I'm like, I need me a good plot.
Uh,
And I wouldn't say this is a strong plot-based book,
no.
but I do think it's a good exploration, experiential book. I To me, I'm like, it would have taken me all the way to like a 5 had there been like a plot point that he like resolved or something. Um,
Sure.
it,
I like anything that takes me into the mind of a character. Like
mhm.
makes me feel like I'm inside their head. And so that did it for me. I felt like I got to experience life through Craig.
So I'm gonna actually amend my rating.
Hmm.
As a mainstream reader, I would rate it 3.5. I do think I'd rate it higher as a therapist reader.
Okay.
Like I would call this one of the like required readings as a therapist. Like it actually does a really good job giving you a viewpoint of a teenager going through all of this. And
Yeah, I think it's a good one. I this on a sad note, the author later died by suicide. He was not able
see to
um, to make it through life. And I don't know what happened along his journey afterwards, but I think he died in his 30s.
hmm.
But he did some like screenwriting. He did a lot of really interesting things after this book.
Yeah,
Um,
well, he has a legacy and I think his book can still help. Like this is it's our governor here in Utah had this thing he liked to say is every suicide is preventable.
mm,
And as a therapist, I don't know if I believe that.
mm.
Think suicide can be part of the disease of depression or whatever. And same way that, like, I don't know, I guess you could say that with diabetes. Like, it feels like every diabetes death could be preventable because we have
You have the technology.
doctors and blah, 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 and like, I don't know, but there's a lot of factors that social and systemic factors that go into it. Um, so it's interesting because it doesn't change the book for me because I think, and that's probably why this book is so real and raw, is he's had this very specific specific experience, and can write about it real and raw in that way.
Yeah, from the first person perspective.
Yeah.
Well, good. I hope you guys enjoyed our discussion today. Let us know if you have any other thoughts about this book and what you liked, what you didn't like, and we'll see you on our next episode.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us on the Therapist Book Club. We hope today's conversation inspired you to explore new stories and perspectives.
Don't forget to follow us for more episodes, share your favorite books with us, and join the conversation on how books and mental health connect on our social media channels.
Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, your story matters.